everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us in our Synthetic Intelligence Forum online session on keys to developing a successful AI strategy. My name is Vic. I'm the founder of the Synthetic Intelligence Forum, and we had received a lot of requests from our community members to put together a session to really discuss the strategic pillars of building successful AI strategies. First of all, I'm very happy to be joined by my colleague Andre Loranger from Statistics Canada. He's with us today. We have Carolyn joining us from National Research Council of Canada, and we also have Zia Mansour from Microsoft. So before we go into the actual subject matter of the discussion, I'd like to invite colleagues one by one to really talk about their journeys, their background, how they found their way into the data science world and into the world of artificial intelligence. So Carolyn, I'd like to start with you. Thank you.
Oh, well, thanks, Vic, and thanks for inviting me. So I'm a professor of computer science, started out in data analytics, moving up through human-computer interaction, and then how we actually analyze the data in order to make better decisions. So most of my academic career has been at Dalhousie University in the computer science department. And for the last 2 years, I've been at the National Research Council as their Chief Digital Research Officer and the lead for the Digital Technologies Research Center, where we have 150 data science variations and a particular data science analytic group.
Thank you, Carolyn. Very nice to meet you and very nice to have you on this session. Andre, I'd like to now pass the mic to you.
Thank you, Vic, and thanks for the invitation. This is a really interesting panel and discussion. So my journey is very different from Carolyn's, and I'd like to be on the record right now to say that I'm not a data scientist. I'm not a computer scientist. I'm an economist by training, and I've been working at StatsCan more or less my whole career, and most of my career was spent on economic statistics. So producing the GDP estimates and the price indexes such as the CPI and so on. In my new portfolio at the organization, I'm the assistant chief statistician for strategic data management methods, so all the survey methodology and so on, and analysis. So analytics and methodology and data science falls under my portfolio. I've been at StatsCan for many years. As many StatCan employees, we spend our careers there, and I think it's not a stretch to say that data has been more or less my my preoccupation, and certainly a big part of what I do for a living.
Thank you, Andre, for making the time to join us, making the time in your busy schedule. And Zia, very happy to have you on the call as well. I came to the government from the software industry. You are a thought leader in the software industry working at Microsoft Canada. So tell us a little bit about your professional journey. Tell us a little bit about your background and how it is you got, shall we say, embroiled in the world of AI and data science.
Awesome. Well, thanks for inviting me, Vic. Great to be here with you, Carolyn and Andre. So I lead our customer success team here at Microsoft in Canada. But like Andre, I'm also not a data scientist, but super passionate about the topic. So I lead the technical team for Microsoft in Canada, working across both enterprise, commercial customers, public sector, government, across the country around technology adoption. And so within that, I have a team focused on data and AI, consists of data scientists, and of course, having a lot of fun working with customers and governments across the country. And I've been on the early journey of cloud computing. And so I've been part of building the cloud for Microsoft in Canada, from opening up our data centers to providing cloud services for Canadian customers in Canada. So it's been quite the journey, and obviously we'll get more into it. But data has been probably one of the most, I'd say, fun topics and top of mind topics I've been working with customers across the country.
Thank you, Zia. So all of you have mentioned the importance of data in your work and the importance of data in sort of the impact that your organizations drive on a daily basis. Andre, I'd like to come to you first with my first question. You know, Statistics Canada is world renowned to be experts, and sort of your skills and the capabilities and the work that Statistics Canada does in many senses is non-pareil. So I want to start by asking you, Andre, what does success look like? After all, the topic of the title of our topic today is in fact building successful AI strategies. So what does a successful AI strategy look like?
Well, it's interesting again, and you know, that disclaimer that I'm not a data scientist, I think I'd like to reemphasize that. But you know, throughout my career at StatsCan and over the last few years, what we've been doing, we started with thinking about you know, how do we leverage data science and the capabilities it offers to do the work of the National Statistical Organization. And we created a modest team, a very small team, in one of my units called our Data Science Accelerator. And there we were focused on operations and creating efficiencies and introducing some AI into our business. We've since created a full division where we've got a pretty significant team now working on data science, and so we're building momentum, and we are actually, as we speak, creating that vision. The other part I think that I want to emphasize is for a national statistics organization, quality is very important, right? The quality of our estimates. So we're working really hard to develop methodologies and quality measures around the AI and ML work that we're doing. So specifically to your question, you know, what are the factors of success? There's a few things that I'd like to touch on. I'd like to make three main points. So one is that to sort of properly use AI, you have to focus in on what issues you're trying to resolve, right? And there's a lot of challenges there. We've got a lot more high volume, high variety, high velocity data, you know, and that's increasing with 5G, Internet of Things, and so on. There's an expectation for faster, more real-time data, new products, and higher automation to enable production. And understanding these challenges and how AI can help address those challenges is a big part of it. So what does success look like? Well, I think in building a strategy, we want to make sure that we're able to position the organization for success. So you have to go back to sort of what the mandate of the organization is and think about, okay, so how do we leverage these tools to drive success? Data science is a team sport. It's not just about sort of sitting at your desk cranking out algorithms and methodologies. We have to include sort of the economists and the various parts of the organization that feed into our work. So being very inclusive in our work. We have to build buy-in from the rest of the organization. And again, what do those methodologies, what do those algorithms bring to the table? And at the end of the day, we want to be able to generate value for the organization. So what is the value proposition? So as we speak, you know, we are our division of data science in the organization. We've created this brand new organizational structure, and we're working through all that thinking to develop that vision for the organization. But those are kind of the things that we're looking at right now.
Thank you, Andre. Carolyn, I'd like to now come to you. You know, NRC is a very interesting organization because not only do you apply AI in very innovative ways, but you also do fundamental research in AI from a theoretical perspective, from a computational perspective, almost at a meta level. So Carolyn, what does success look like to you when it comes to AI strategies at NRC?
Well, I totally agree with Andre. I think that really it's about making sure that what we're really trying to do is to enable the success of the business strategic plan or the organization. So NRC, of course, is very much tied up in the success of the Canadian economy and the benefit to Canadians. So the strategic plan has got this very broad mandate. But for us to fulfill our mandate, we have a strategic plan. So the answer really is, how does having an AI strategy help us make those goals? And in some ways, as we refresh strategic plans, then the AI and the data strategic plans start to be part of that strategic plan. But at this point, mainly we're enablers. And how do we make that happen? And one of the worries that I have is that we often find a little opportunity and we rush out and we do it, and that's all great. But did it actually help get us where we need to go, or are we just still playing? So that means that we have to answer some pretty serious questions. So what in fact for NRC or any organization are the top business priorities? So not the things that are fun to do, but the things that really fulfill that mandate. And so we have to, first of all, have thought through the data, because putting AI on top of bad data is a fatal flaw, because most people believe that if the computer spits out the answer, it's going to spit out a good answer. So that's a problem. Have we listened to the right voices? Have we listened to the voices of all the stakeholders who will be impacted by this new toolkit that we have to get to our strategy? And I think that it's more and more important that we have a more holistic look at who's using it. So not just the person on the keyboard, not just the developers, not just the management, but the people, the clients. So you have clients in a government sense as well as for a business sense. Have they had a voice? Have we thought about the impacts on different kinds of people in our country? So if you apply AI to a citizen engagement kind of thing for the government, have you actually collected data and thought about the impact for disadvantaged groups, people across the country, people without high bandwidth? These are things we have to think about before we turn over the plans to a developer, because the developer will develop exactly what we said. Go and do this without thinking it through. So really important part of our strategy, because that may actually create a barrier to our strategic success. So we need to really think about that. And that means we have to really think, do we have the right things in place in order to use AI for a strategy? Do we have the right technology? So I'm glad we've got a Microsoft person here. What kind of technology do we need? Not just software, but hardware, bandwidth, everything. And do we have the right skills? And I would say probably as important as both of those is, do we have management buy-in? Does management understand what's happening? Do they actually support it? Are they knowledgeable? Do they see how it fits? Or are they just being patient with the geeks in the crowd? So I'll leave it there. And
thank you, Carolyn. Very interesting. Zia, you have a very interesting perspective on this topic, I'm sure, because not only is Microsoft well recognized sort of as adopters of AI, but in your specific role, you are responsible, as your title indeed says, for customer success. So really, what does success look like when you take this internal facing and external facing view of the industry to say, what does success look like in the context of an AI strategy?
Yeah, I mean, interesting. And I don't want to oversimplify things, but I think it's super important to stay grounded on. And common theme from my colleagues. I mean, Andre mentioned what problems trying to solve, what's the organizational mandate. Carolyn mentioned enabling success of the business strategic plan. So like number one, most important, is my AI strategy driving the business value and business outcomes? Similar to AI projects, I work with a bunch of customers on data projects, and you end up losing sight of what's the business outcome and end up focusing just on the technology. For example, bringing together vast amounts of data, which is great, but so what? What are those desired outcomes that we want to drive towards? Another important point, and I think we're going to get into more of a discussion on this later, and I think is obviously super important, is how are we incorporating ethics and responsible AI? Not hard, open up any news article or lots of fair discussions around the societal concerns around AI. And the last point, and Carolyn mentioned this one, but is how do you shift from single use case scenarios to a more holistic AI strategy? And a really important, I think, point on that one is, how as an organization are you boundaryless around developing that strategy? So it shouldn't just be an AI group developing that strategy, but are we bringing together key stakeholders from different disciplines? Really, really important to bring that diverse perspective in developing that AI strategy.
Very interesting, Zia. Thank you. So, Carolyn, for the next question, I'd like to come back to you now. All the colleagues on the panel have talked about this importance of data. Everybody talked about importance of technology, culture in the organization, mapping between the organizational strategy and the AI strategy. So, the question I have is, there's a number of things that have been discussed. Which other factors do you see are important contributors to the success of an AI strategy? Or if I can focus the question a little bit, what role does, for example, governance play in ensuring, because we're talking about mapping from an organizational strategy to an AI strategy, are there other factors in your view, and also what role does governance play in this overall conversation?
Well, thanks, great question. I spent 8 or 9 years as the provost of Housing, so governance is on my t-shirt. So I really much appreciate that question. And I think that governance is a key factor to success. So how do you get those voices in? How do you ensure that you've got you've pushed the responsibility to the right level, and there's an accountability framework so that good ideas get fed up, things are monitored, there are key performance indicators and we're held to them, or at least we try our best. But without good governance, all of this is just a whole bunch of little random pieces. So think of an automated jigsaw puzzle, but each jigsaw puzzle has got their own algorithm and they're all running off. So governance is really key. And I don't mean a traditional top-down, you've got a boss and boss says what everybody's supposed to be doing. I mean a much more collegial, agile framework. But without a governance, people don't understand their responsibilities and they don't feel that their voice is being heard at all. So big proponent of that. And each situation needs a different form of governance. So there isn't, even in government, I would argue that there isn't one best practice on that. I think the other things, and most of these come out of governance. So you need a governance structure to ensure that your best practices and your roadmap are actually established and agreed upon, and then are enacted. So that would hold for stakeholder engagement. So as Zia said, you can't expect 3 people in a room, a nice team, to come up with the ultimate and the optimal AI solution for something. You need a wide range of people. You need a wide range of people thinking about future impact, how it fits with other things. So that's also part of the governance, to make sure that those voices are put in play. I think the most important thing is to have a data strategy that fits with your AI strategy, and that both of them have a roadmap from what data are you collecting, how do you make it interoperable, so that you don't just have different data sets like we have in hospitals and you can't do anything, because different people own different pieces and it's recorded in a different way, and that there are clear expectations around what this system is going to do. So the leadership, the executive level, and the developers and the users all have the same expectations about what this is supposed to do. And that means that we have to evolve a much higher level of transparency in how these systems work and how those decisions were made. So it's not just, that's a great example. So you put it in and something comes out. Well, it's actually not quite that simple under the hood. But we have to. There are some implicit rules built in there, so we need to make it transparent, and we have to be much more agile about the way we think about developing AI systems. The whole development cycle has moved away from you build it once and it makes a hydro plant work for 50 years. Well, you're lucky if it works for a year and a half before it has to evolve. We've got better ideas. We've got new techniques. So as we're going through, we learn as we're building rather than we have a blueprint and we build the building. We have to think about how it's going to be used. And I would bring that all back to some notion of appropriate governance. So I think that's, I'm glad you brought that up.
Thank you, Carolyn. So, Andre, the same question for you. Carolyn talked about the importance of things needing to fit together and sort of this notion of an architecture. So, Andre, what would you say are some of the critical success factors of a good AI strategy, and what role do you see good architectural management and governance playing in that?
Yeah. Can I say ditto?
Yeah.
It's really interesting because as I was thinking about sort of addressing that question, a lot of the things that Carolyn actually said were part of my response as well. I think it does start with data governance, and that data governance needs to touch on a broad spectrum of things. You mentioned architecture and so on, so you need to manage that part of it. You also, and we were going to talk about this later on in a follow-up question, but the ethics around the use of AI, and to me, that's a key part of what you're trying to build in terms of the governance and the transparency and the trust and the quality. The part of governance is also getting those stakeholder views and setting yourself up to have advisory committees and panels and so on in terms of the work that you do. So I think those touch on the governance aspects, but in terms of a guarantee of success for an AI strategy, there's other things that come into play as well, and I'll just mention a few of them. So again, the alignment with the business objectives is key. What we found is that we need to spend a considerable amount of time investing in the R&D capacity. So you need to have a strong nucleus of very capable people that can sort of prototype things and so on. So the R&D is very, very important. Linked to that is the computing infrastructure. So you need an infrastructure to actually be able to deliver on what you want to produce. And the other part is the human resources. So you need to invest in talent and build expertise. And the other key part of all of this is implementing AI also means implementing culture change in the organization, certainly in ours. And we've all heard those statements about culture, eating governance for breakfast, and so on. So you need to think about all the cultural aspects of your organization as you implement this strategy. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Andre. And Zia, the same question to you now is the critical success factors in what makes a good AI strategy.
Awesome. So I'll start with building on Andre's comment of culture. I love this quote from Harvard Business Review. AI transformation is not a project, but a capability. So it all starts with that cultural shift. Super, super important around leadership, embracing an agile, experimental, and adaptable culture. Like AI in its nature is experimental field. So there's going to be that iterative experimentation in any setting to make it work. So really, really important that you have that buy-in from the leadership. And then I think AI often gets all the attention these days, but data fuels that intelligence. Systems are only as intelligent on the data which they're going to reason over. So building on both what Carolyn and Andre said, data strategy is critical. You have to kind of get that data estate or data in order. Otherwise, my peer has this awesome quote that's always stuck with me. You'll end up having a very elaborate AI strategy, and all you're going to end up doing is making mistakes with greater confidence than ever before, right? And so that data piece ends up just being so important. And so probably one of the most practical and important areas of success not happening, I feel like, is because of not getting that data estate in order. And maybe I'll just end with an example of a customer we work with, a kind of a practical customer. So we work with TransLink BC, the transit system in BC, and did a bunch of work with them around how can they use AI for the most common scenario that any of us would probably reason with, which is how do I improve departure time and estimates? And so to enable AI as a capability at TransLink, there's a few things that they did. One, they focus on upskilling their team around AI, and so doing a bunch of envisioning, education, workshops. They brought together, common theme that everyone's mentioned, the required skill sets across the company or the organization. So the domain experts, the data engineering team, the data science team, and the business, everyone kind of together. They really embraced the agile and experimental nature of AI. super important point, they provided the team with those rich data sets, both internally, and then they also acquired some data sets externally. And so as a result, they were able to take what I feel like are the right steps around enabling AI as a capability. And then for their very first AI use case, they deployed over 1,800 ML models to predict that next bus departure time. Super simple scenario, but very, very valuable to their constituents, and addressing one of their most top customer demands around just accurate predictions for the next bus departure. So I thought that was a good one for me around seeing an organization really adapt what's required for AI.
You're on mute, Vic.
Thank you, Andre. Yes, and great perspective, Zia. And I remember that the Canada School of Public Service actually has a very interesting offering in this space around governance and tying AI from a technical perspective to a strategic perspective called the Digital Academy. I also know, Zia, Microsoft has an AI business school, I believe, and I'm going to put the link down below here. You can go to Bing and run a search, and you can find the AI business school. So these kinds of topics, which I feel are very important, the Canada School of Public Service Digital Academy, and then the Microsoft AI Business School. That's great. So Zia, I'll come to the third question, start with you. You touched on it, Andre, Carolyn, everybody touched on responsible AI, beneficial AI. And we talk about this notion of ethics in AI. And I want to have you address how you incorporate these concerns into a strategy that is being built. And I think I also want you to maybe touch a little bit on this notion of a trade-off. Oftentimes people say, well, what if you end up in a situation where a higher technically performing model is a model that is not explainable versus a model that has perhaps a lower precision or recall or accuracy or some other kind of technical metric is inherently more explainable. So what does that, in your mind, how do responsible and beneficial AI fit in an AI strategy? And second part, how would you advise leaders to reconcile that trade-off? Zia, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think it's a trade. I mean, ethics and responsible is a critical element of an AI strategy. So I'll share maybe a little bit of what we've been doing at Microsoft to incorporate responsible AI. And I think it's a success. It's an approach that could be repeatable by any organization. So back in about, I think 2016, it probably was, we introduced 6 what we call principles, which are at the core of responsible AI. And so I'll kind of go through them: fairness, reliability and safety, privacy and security, inclusiveness, which really means the AI systems empowering everyone, engaging people, transparency, but to your question around AI systems should be understandable, and then finally accountability. So taking those 6 principles, we then started building practices to embed those principles. So we created things like an AI fairness checklist, conversational AI guidelines, inclusive guidelines. And then based on those practices, we then kind of built tools so we could better understand, protect, and control our AI model. So an example is something that's an open source toolkit we developed called FairLearn. And FairLearn is a toolkit for developing and assessing the fairness of AI. So focus on that challenge of prioritizing fairness in our AI systems. And so that's available for everyone. And then, kind of a little bit to your previous question, we built this governance system to enable a responsible AI at scale. So creating a responsible AI office committee with a diverse set of skills. And then that same governance system continues to evolve to this day. Obviously the technology and the world is changing quickly. And we also developed and established this committee. You may have heard of it, called Ether. We call it Microsoft AI and Ethics in our engineering and research, where we're bringing together senior leaders from across the company to focus on those internal policies and how to respond to specific issues in a responsible way. So it serves as an advisory group to senior leaders in the company, and also, for example, our Office of Responsible AI. And so what you have this opportunity is, let's say I'm a developer, or I'm helping a customer, or I'm an internal developer developing a toolkit for customers. If I ever have any questions, I have this forum to get guidance on those sensitive topics around use of AI and elevating those issues. So in a nutshell, it's kind of those principles, how you take those principles to practice, the tools, and then ensuring we're wrapping around that that governance.
Thank you, Zia. Carolyn, the same question to you. You had also identified responsible AI and beneficial AI as a critical success factor of any AI strategy. How do you see it fitting together? And as Zia said, is it something that's a must-have? I mean, certainly from your answer, Carolyn, it would seem that way. How do you see this fitting together, ethical concerns into an AI strategy?
Right. It is core to the whole issue, I think, and it's core to providing the kinds of benefits and values that we think that we can get out of AI. And I just remind everybody that there are many declarations and frameworks around ethical AI and responsible. And so the Montreal Declaration for Responsible Development of AI, Canada's Digital Charter is mainly, when you look at it, about a responsible AI. And responsible AI, there's a global framework by 2050 for different experts around the world. Well worth looking at. I'd be happy to give Vic the links afterwards, because you'll see this convergence, these repeating themes. So out of all those, I just picked a few that were near and dear to my heart. But before I'll just quickly go through these, but my sort of overall comment is, much like culture eats governance, I think developers eat policy. So when somebody writes code, whether or not they're following the policy, they have set policy, right? And so we need to be really mindful of that sort of protective bubble within which you do development, that it becomes more porous. And it's part of the agility and the part of the external voices. So we need to start thinking about the responsible and accountability part from making the design all the way through to testing and all that stuff, and then over multiple years the compliance to what the intent was for it, because we all make edits. There was a little mistake and you add a little this and you add a little that. At the end, does it actually still comply to what you thought you had responsible AI for in the first place? So you can iterate along a happy path, but you might iterate along an unintentional path. And so we need to be mindful of that. And so all of these things that Zia and I'm sure Andre will leap in have to do about how we keep that focus as we go through this whole journey of getting workable, deployable.
Thank you, Carolyn. So, Andre, I'd like to pose the same question to you, and also just with the extra layer there, Andre, you know, with your team, you mentioned the Data Science Accelerator, and we know in the Government of Canada, we do have a directive on automated decision-making. We do have the Algorithmic Impact Assessment. How has your team, as Carolyn said, you know, developers set policy, whether or not they're following policy? So how do you make that happen, Andre? How does it go from aspirational to operational in your team when it comes to ethics as a part of your AI initiative?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. I mean, this is a very important question for Statistics Canada, because ethics and trust are, in a sense, our currency. So all scientific activities need to be carried out in an ethical and responsible manner. I think everybody would agree with that. At StatsCan, over the last few years, we've really been investing a lot on the ethical side of data, and the intersection between data collection and privacy, and sort of respecting both, and so on. We've developed a framework that encapsulates all of our data collection. It's a necessity and proportionality framework, where we really focus on why is this data important? Why do we need to use this data? And we make sure that its use is proportional to that need and the impact that data has. In that framework, ethics are a big part of it, and we've set up a structure where we have ethical reviews within the organization, but there's also an external advisory ethical board where we sometimes go to this committee to ask, sort of, okay, well, how far should we go? You know, those kind of things. And that is a very important foundation for the work that we want to do. More specifically, we've developed a bunch of practices and frameworks for our machine learning that actually link to those directives and policies that you talked about. For example, the directive on automated decision making. So our framework that we're using at Statistics Canada for machine learning has 4 principal axes, so to speak: respect for people, respect for data, sound application, and sound methods. And if we think about that a little bit further, what does sound methods means? Well, it means that we have valid inference, we avoid bias, we're promoting quality and rigor. And on sound application, it's really about transparency and reproducibility of the results. So as we develop use cases and prototypes of AI into production, this is the framework that we're using, and sort of at every step of the way, there's a consideration about how the projects interacts with all those elements I mentioned in the framework.
Okay, great. Thank you, Andre. So, Carolyn, for the next question, I'd like to pass the mic to you. And we talked about what AI success looks like in the context of an AI strategy. We touched a little bit on what are some of the critical success factors. I want to now invert the question and say, what are some of the common pitfalls and risks and traps that leaders should avoid, decision makers should avoid when they're developing AI strategies? And I suppose one way of looking at this could be that don't do anything that undermines the good stuff, such as don't have bad governance or don't, ignore ethical topics for sure. But aside from that, what are some other self-evident or maybe even some latent risks and challenges that lurk in the shadows that decision makers ought to be aware of?
Well, we could go on quite a bit for this one, Vic, but I'll try and keep it short. I looked at this in under 2 categories: overestimating and underestimating. So when I look at pitfalls that overestimate, that's largely around overestimating the impact and success of this AI project that you have. So developers will spread it out at scale and we'll see what happens. Big pitfall. The second is that you overestimate how aligned your bright idea is with the business strategy. So sometimes it's just opportunistic, and typically it's over-optimistic. So the reality checks before you go ahead, and not enough little prototypes trying, do I have the right data, all the things that we've talked about. And the underestimating part, which is probably at least as important, is I think we underestimate the need for good policy and regulatory frameworks. So we talk about, ethics, we talk about transparency, etc., but we don't have policy and regulatory frameworks that are, there may be some within particular departments or companies, but not widespread. We certainly underestimate the need for talent and how we continual upskilling of talent. We totally, and I think we all agree on this, have underestimated the importance, the critical importance of the quality of the data in both social ways, scale way, access way, interoperability ways. Using legacy, the third one would be using legacy infrastructure is a sure way to kill a project. We have to think about our IT infrastructure and our human resources infrastructure in a whole new way. Think about what's going to happen when we can actually do hybrid computing with quantum and classical computing on AI problems. We don't, right? Our infrastructure isn't going to support that. And I think also importantly is we underestimate the new generation of expectations of our citizens and our users and governments and private sector. Everybody expects we can get online anytime, we're going to get the answer we want when we want it, and it's going to be right. And AI is going to solve all of our problems. That is, we underestimate how much people are thinking that way. You go to the government, I just want to go one place and I'm going to get the right answer. So those would be my big pitfalls.
Thank you. And thank you, Carolyn. And Andre, the same question for you. What are some common pitfalls and traps that decision makers should avoid?
Thanks, Vic. Again, my thoughts parallel those of Carolyn quite closely. The first thing is again, you know, you have to ask yourself the question, why AI and how AI will help this particular problem. And it's not obvious to me that AI will solve every problem that exists. So that's the first thing. Linked to that is the issue of expectations that Carolyn mentions. Despite the fact that AI might be able to solve a lot of problems, it can't solve all the problems, but there's an expectation that, yeah, it will, and instantly, because we're applying these new technologies, will have instantaneous answers that you know, that answer a particular issue and a particular gap. The other thing is that we often underestimate the amount of effort we need to manage and prepare the data, to build the expertise to actually be able to leverage AI, you know, to make the tools and the infrastructure available, and sort of to work with partners across the organization to sort of resolve those issues. So underestimating the effort is, I think, a big pitfall. And another thing is that we focused a lot on the data and the importance of you know, the quality of the incoming data. The other part, though, is you need you need people to have solid data foundations and good data literacy, etc. Because if you don't, you know, you're doomed to fail. It's a bit like a pyramid, right? You have to start with the foundation, and you don't start at the top. You have to start at the foundation, and the foundation are those key pieces around data literacy and so on, and all the stewardship and the classifications and all the stuff, quite honestly, that bore a lot of people, but it you know, that's a foundational layer that's absolutely necessary. And I'll go back to the other part, which is culture. We talked a bit about culture in other questions, and I think it's utilizing AI properly in an organization involves culture change, and that's a difficult challenge. And you have to be mindful of it, because if you don't, you're not going to succeed. The last part is about scale. In our view, AI is not about delivering one or two applications, but it's really about scaling up and leveraging the power across the organization. So, and if you do it in a piecemeal way, you'll never achieve sort of what you want to get out of it.
Thank you, Andre. And Zia, you know, as you mentioned, customer success is sort of in the DNA of what it is that you do, and certainly there are things which you know, I'm sure you're warning your customers what not to do. So would you be able to share some insights, some nuggets on what are things that folks should actually avoid doing when it comes to building AI strategies?
Sure, yeah. First of all, I agree with all the comments from both Carolyn and Andre. So just building on those, I think the first one, I'm not going to beat it to death, but data, state, and order. I was going to talk more about it, but both of my colleagues already talked about that, so I'll stop there. But data, state, super, super important. It all starts with that. The other one, which is to me quite interesting, when I look at like just a bunch of projects we've worked both across government and with commercial customers. This one I see probably too often, which is different teams, you know, skill sets. They kind of build their AI pipelines or the AI projects in silos. And so I see too often proof of concepts being built in isolation and then not getting to that next stage beyond that POC. Like it's a lot of great ideas, but they just get stuck in that POC phase. So that's a very, very common one. And the other one I would say kind of relate to that is kind of the unqualified business problem and objective motivating that AI strategy. So it's a common theme. I think we all talked about it, which is ignoring and diminishing that business involvement early and over pivoting on the tech. So kind of doing AI for AI's sake. And I think that leads to, you know, a lot of what I would say the projects that just get stuck. I think the infrastructure one, important. I mentioned before, experimental in nature, you know, so things like on-demand computing, the right toolkits for the practitioners. I obviously think cloud computing plays a key role. Hybrid computing plays a key role. That complements and supports the agility that you need for AI. And maybe the last point I'll just say, and I won't go into it because we just talked about it. I do think that lack of responsible AI guidelines and governance super important to make sure you as an organization. We talked about what makes a successful AI strategy, and so that one I think is just super important.
Thank you, Zia. So, Andre, I'd like to now come to the next question for you. And we all know that the field of AI is changing very rapidly. Every day, it seems there's a new breakthrough in natural language processing or machine vision or reinforcement learning or recommender systems. How do you ensure, especially since you mentioned this notion, the importance of talent, and you talked about the importance of digital literacy and culture, how do you ensure that from a technical perspective, you're able to keep up, your organization keeps up with that, but then also from a cultural literacy perspective as well, that your organization is enabled from a capability perspective, as Zia said, it's enabled in the right way to be ready for the future?
Yeah, that's a very important question. I think, again, the first part is staying connected to the client users and the needs, right, and having these user-centric approaches. More broadly, as an organization at StatsCan, that's what we're trying to do over the last few years as we're trying to modernize the organization to become more user-centric. But what does that imply? Well, that implies that we need to really stay abreast of methods and technology and tools. Carolyn earlier mentioned, the impact of quantum technology and other things like homomorphic encryption and multi-party computation and so on. So we need to stay abreast of all those things, and that's not an easy task because the science is evolving very rapidly. So we always need to stay plugged in, participating in these kind of networks. So in general, we need to collaborate a lot to sort of either through osmosis or directly sort of be aware of these new developments. The technology itself is useful. I think cloud platforms themselves enable to drive the technology. For example, over the course of the summer, we worked with Microsoft on our data analytics as a service platform and putting a data science collaborative space on board. And we've just been able to leverage the tools, again, staying connected to the industry, to the professional, and so on, to be able to drive where we want to go. But lastly, I think it's this idea that a strategy always needs to be evergreen. The technology society is evolving so fast. What we're trying to measure is evolving so fast that we always need to stay abreast of what's going on. What are the issues we're trying to measure, and factor those into an evolving strategy as we move forward. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Andre. And Carolyn, the same question for you is, how do you ensure your organization is at the forefront of AI, not just now, but also for the future?
Well, I think, first of all, the notion of an AI strategy needs to be built into the highest level. So it's not just down in IT, DT. And I think that includes this sort of accountability for the way resources are spent against the actual benefits now and or in the future. Really important, I think. And I think that, as it changes, we have to be prepared and able to stand up to the current hype. So I'll put quantum in there. Quantum's going to do everything. Quantum's going to do a lot. But we have to figure out, we have to be able to stand up to the hype and say, right now, for the next 3 years, here's what we can do, here's what we can see on that horizon, and here's how it's going to benefit. So my advice to this is sort of the same as I give to everybody. Just stay plugged in. Don't close your ears. Stay plugged into what government's doing, because you always get to speak back. If you listen, you have the right to put your opinion out there. So listen to government, listen to industry really carefully, listen to academia, and listen to what the citizens are saying. And then we have a much better sense of where we need it to go, who has concerns, and where it's working and where it's not.
Thank you, Carolyn. And Zia, the same question for you as well.
Awesome. There's this great book by an author, Carol Dweck, called Growth Mindset. And it kind of reminds me about this question. I think it's so important to have that culture in your organization of a growth mindset. because as we just talked about, I mean, we're from a technical perspective, this industry, this topic is so fast moving. I also think about this concept of tech intensity, you know, that constant, and Carolyn talked about it earlier, that plan for always kind of thinking about that upskilling for the practitioners, for decision makers, and having that agile culture. And I think it's important to then talk about, hey, look, the technology is changing, but, you know, when I think about the business processes, don't get not so focused on AI being a capability, but focus on how AI can help the organization work faster, better, smarter, and leveraging it as a tool and grounded on ensuring that that AI strategy remains kind of connected to what's important to the business. Because if you lose sight of that, you know, we talked a lot about today, that I think ends up being one of the most important pieces.
Okay, thank you, Zia. So there's a couple of questions from the audience. Maybe we can just have them targeted and answered by specific panel discussants. So Zia, there's a question that I'd like to frame to you. This question is about how do we, what are your suggestions for ensuring that projects do not get stuck in the POC stage? How do you actually scale projects?
Yeah, I'd love to hear from if some of my colleagues agree. It's a good one. I don't know if I got a perfect answer for you, but I think there's a couple key ones. I mean, I don't want to kind of repeat things we mentioned earlier. Look, there is this nature of experimentation, and experimentation is important. So it's that's okay. But I do think when we talk about some of the pitfalls, a lot of us around involving the business, making sure that we're not doing POCs for the sake of technology and doing it in silo, driving kind of that boundaryless across the organization, getting that diverse perspective from other key stakeholders. It sounds so simple, but I can't tell you how many times, you know, there'll be a team that goes into a room and works on something for literally weeks and if not months, without that kind of feedback loop from the rest of the organization. So maybe those are just a few things. I don't know, Carolyn or others, if you have any other thoughts.
Yes, Carolyn or Andre, would you like to add to that? How to get projects not getting stuck at POC stage?
Yeah, so one thing that I have found is that it's really important. I totally agree with the feedback, and I call that socialization. Make sure you're out there talking about it, getting feedback, bouncing it off other ears, because inward thinking and talking doesn't really get you out of that box. The other thing I would suggest is it's really important to have a champion, so that you didn't just go off and do skunk works in the corner. You had a champion for that skunk work, and you're keeping that person really up to date. So they're also socializing, but at a different level. So when you come back with your proof points, you've got a channel for exploring it.
Great. Thank you. Andre, I'd like to come to you with another question from our attendees. So this question has to do with, we talked about the Treasury Board policy, and also StatsCan has its own set of very stringent rules. But Andre, are there any specific kind of guidances that you can talk about in terms of checks and balances of data management or data analysis in StatsCan above and beyond what's out from the central agencies?
Well, I've already mentioned what we're doing in terms of our necessity and proportionality framework. I suppose I should add a little bit about the data quality frameworks that we have as an organization that have always helped us manage our data through the lifespan of the organization. So now, as we're seeing AI and data science emerge, we're working to embed those new developments into those frameworks. Now, that doesn't give you a very specific answer. Like, there's a lot of things that are happening, mainly led by the CIO branch at Treasury Board on, like we've talked about the directive on automated decision making and so on. There's also a lot of activity going on in terms of the standards creating environment. So with the Standards Council of Canada, Carolyn and I participate in the collaborative on data governance. And here we're thinking about the roadmap for developing standards around the management and use of data. And so, of course, AI fits into that. There's also work of the CIO Strategy Council, who's been very active in developing standards around managing data and third-party access to data and so on, and they're also active in that space. So I hope that provides a good overview of the answer.
Thank you, Andre. And just in the interest of time, Carolyn, perhaps I can ask the last question to you and give the opportunity also for Andre and Zia to comment on it as well. So there is a comment here from an attendee who's asking, we talked about AI strategy and organizational strategy or enterprise strategy, but how important is it to co-develop and co-design AI strategy and the data strategy in your enterprise?
Oh, critical. I was so critical I didn't say it out loud. You can't have an AI strategy unless you've got a good, solid, thoughtful, accountable data strategy. So if you think about a roadmap, you have to, and then you have to feed back through, of course. But those things, you can't accomplish good AI if you don't have good data. I think end of story. I hope Zia agrees.
Yeah, I'll just end with my quote before. You'll end up having the most elaborate AI strategy. You'll just make mistakes with higher confidence than ever before.
Faster.
Exactly, faster.
Andre, any closing thoughts from you?
On that, for us, they're one and the same. And in fact, as we think about all of these issues at StatsCan, it's part of our modernization strategy writ large. So at the end of the day, I don't really distinguish between them. AI is just another tool in the toolkit that's part of our broader data landscape.
Thank you very much, Andre, Carolyn, Zia, for your thoughtful and thought-provoking responses. I had a lot of questions which I wanted to ask, which I couldn't in the interest of time. I know there's a lot of questions in the chat, so we'll have to have you back in a couple of weeks, couple of months, so we can continue this dialogue. And by that time, the technology would have leapt far ahead and we'd have more to talk about. But thank you so much, sincerely, on behalf of the Synthetic Intelligence Forum community. Looking forward to meeting with you again online then. Thank you, everybody. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Goodbye.